I'm Ursula Morgan. I am Woodstock Byrdcliffe Guild's Director of Exhibitions, and it is my great pleasure to welcome you today to both our talk, and then that will be followed by our artist reception. And I also get the great privilege of introducing our panelist and our exhibition curator, Douglas I. Shear. Douglas Shear is an artist, a writer living in Woodstock. He has been an abstract painter since the 1950s. His artist parents took part in the WPA Artists Union and Hans Hofmann classes. In 1974, he co-founded Artists Talk on Art, the world's longest running panel series, which has presented over 8,500 artists, more than 1,000 panels and dialogues. He has become Chairman Emeritus in 2019. He was Archivist of Artists Talk on Art Archive, which resides at Archives of American Art of the Smithsonian Institution. He currently serves as board president and chairs a programming committee for the 2022 panels of Artists Talk on Art. In addition, Shear serves on the Education and Public Engagement Committee at the Samuel Dorsey Museum of Art at SUNY New Paltz. He is a board member of the Woodstock Byrdcliffe Guild, where he serves on the Exhibition Committee, the Program Committee, and leads the Byrdcliffe Forum Virtual Talk Series. As part of the Byrdcliffe Forum, launched in 2020 to offer additional virtual content during the pandemic, 10 artists were selected by the Forum Committee to represent Woodstock in a series called Woodstock Masters. Each artist is highly accomplished practitioner and known for living near or in Woodstock, and have taught and shown locally as well. The artists include Nancy Azara, Jenne Currie, Donald Elder, Yale Epstein, Mary Frank, Heather Hutchison, Portia Munson, Judy Pfaff, Joan Snyder, and Hongnian Zhang. Bringing our virtual program into the gallery space, we are honored today to open our current exhibition, A Sense of Place, which features these artists' works. So, please join me in welcoming Byrdcliffe Forum Chair and our exhibition curator, Douglas Shear.
Thank you very much. You just read about half of my comments, but that's okay. I believe that Portia will be joining us, at least she was supposed to, so when she gets here, we'll add her in. As you have all experienced, as we've all experienced, the COVID pandemic struck in the spring of 2020, and at that time we decided to create a virtual series and named it the Byrdcliffe Forum. As we originally conceived it in the first year, it was a mixture of book talks and art talks, and we were doing it on an every 2-week basis. The book talks were being run by our friends across the road, Jacqueline Keller, at the bookstore. And so we organized a subcommittee of the programming committee, the forum committee, which selected the artists, and we also did some panels, helped to populate the panels. And in the second year, we went to art talks only. And the Woodstock Masters Series was part of that, not all of it, but part of it. I think altogether, we probably produced and recorded about 30 events in that time. How we decided who the Woodstock Masters would be was purely a committee process. The idea was we wanted people who were pretty established, but we also wanted them that could represent what it's like to be in Woodstock, to be an artist in Woodstock, the heritage of the Woodstock art world, mini art world. And that we drew from people who had shown extensively in the area, whether at Zhang or some of the other galleries locally, who have taught at the Woodstock School of Art. A number of these artists in the show and on the panel have been associated with the School of Art for a long time. And also wanted people who lived at least part-time in the area. That is, even if they were in New York City or some other location, they were spending quite a bit of their time, maybe half of their time, living in and around Woodstock. So the events we chose Zoom as the platform, and the events were recorded in the Zoom platform and broadcast live, so to speak, on Zoom. And then those recordings were put up on our Byrdcliffe YouTube channel. And there you will find all of them. And I should add also that as you walk around the show, you'll notice that there are some QR codes associated with the labels of each work of art, each artist. If you use the QR code, it will take you directly to the YouTube video that is directly associated with that artist. So while you're here in the space, you can actually watch at least a part of, a portion of those YouTube videos. I would recommend you try to do that. It's an interesting experience. And of course, go to YouTube, to the Byrdcliffe channel on YouTube anytime, and there you'll find all of them. The interviewers, I actually interviewed Donald Elder, but the interviews generally were chosen by the artists, which is a nice way to do it, so that whether it's a gallerist or a critic, a writer for an art magazine, those who were chosen to be the interviewers knew the artist very well. So what I would like to do in considering a sense of place, the nature of being and working in Woodstock, is to go to each of the artists on the panel and have them address that initially. That'll be our opening question. So I'd like your thoughts, each of you, on what it's like to live and work in or near Woodstock, what's special about being here. And I'd like each of you to answer that, and we'll go from there. So we'll start with that.
Hi, how's it going? Can you hear me? I am living, I am doing in Woodstock. We moved here, so we were still in Dumbo, Brooklyn, and we bought a house here by some miracle, 1997, 97. Shortly thereafter, Giuliani put our building on a list of 150 buildings that were being asked to vacate their commercial buildings, even though all the landlord knew we were living there. We were out on the street, and we had a 2-year-old at the time, so we ended up, we were already pretty much up here, but that kind of finalized it. We were up here pretty much full time because I felt like I was living on the thruway. We were like subletting one, doing this. But when I first came to Woodstock, I always wanted to come to Woodstock, and my husband's family had a place up in Lenox, so we were always going up the thruway to Lenox and saying, "Can we go to Woodstock?" He'd be like, "Yeah, one day." So one day I just took the day off the studio. We were looking at buildings in Brooklyn, and I went off into Saugerties, and I went into a real estate agent, and she was very nice, and she wasn't pressuring me, and she gave me a list of listings and a map, and I ended up on the top of Meads Mountain, and I ended up at KTD, and we had been studying Buddhism with Robert Thurman at the Open Center, and I know he talked a lot about Woodstock, and what I saw was the old mountain house, and that had appeared to me in a dream in which I woke from this dream, and I was completely at peace and at home, and on my husband's chest was dancing like a hologram of the god Yama, god of death, endings, beginnings. Anyway, so I drove down the hill. I called Mark from a payphone, and he said, "Where are you?" I said, "I'm in Woodstock, your new home." And 2 weeks later, we bought a house, not having money or jobs or anything to figure it out. I looked around and I was like, I didn't have a child. We weren't really even talking about having a child. And I was like, "You could be my babysitter. I could be your babysitter. You could, Anyway, so long story short, that's what happened. And Portia and I raised our children together here, and it's been a really wonderful place to be an artist.
Thank you. Hongnian.
Why did you move to Woodstock? Okay, maybe a bit that different story. And I came to this country in 1985. The first 5 years I was in New York, and then later I was widowed. My wife passed away. I had a young daughter. I think that New York is not that safe by that time. I want to move to some countryside. And so the first, I think I like the Amish people in Pennsylvania. I want to move there. And then my friend James Cox, he was my dealer in New York. He said, why you go there? They can eat you. So then you should come to Woodstock. I said, Woodstock? I don't have any idea. Woodstock, the festival, anything. So I listened to him. I rented a house at the corner, for 1 year. And I immediately found the Woodstock people very friendly. And very soon, my little house full with people. A lot is from the bar. After the bar, they still want to play. They come to my place. So I think it's a very friendly place. I like it. And then I got to the Woodstock Art School, asked me to teaching. You know, when you teach, you meet friends even sooner. So I have a lot of friends, and I decided to buy a house, a Rizal apartment house, by that time for sale. So now I settled, and that's 1991. And a couple years later, I meet, through the teaching, I meet my wife, Lois, and she helped me settle the home, make everything look like a home. You know, my daughter has a good stepmother, so that's why I continued living here. Yeah, very good.
Nancy?
Well, I guess I should say that the reason we moved to Woodstock was because it was so ambient. And we also wanted a place outside of the city. And Woodstock just spoke to me. And I knew, it's such an odd thing, but when I first looked at the place we finally bought, it was from somebody who had bought the fixtures from me in my Soho loft 20 years before. And so I thought, well, that must mean something. And the house was a fixer-upper, so, and my partner daughter really wanted to move to the country more than I did, because I wasn't quite sure yet. And so I got the flu. When she had the whole thing prepared, a nice B&B, and we were going to look at places, and the real estate agent had set all these places up. So she was quite dejected. I was a little disappointed, but not as bad as she was. And then I found out that Frank was the person I was going to purchase the house from. He had purchased my fixtures, which is what we used to do. We'd get a loft in downtown or anywhere. A group of artists would buy or sell the things that they put in the loft to make it work, to make it livable. So it was a pretty Wild West kind of feeling because the police would raid every once in a while and people would have to take their stoves and their refrigerators and put them on the roof and look very, I guess you have to be an old timer here because I hear a few people chuckling here. And so that's how we lived. And I didn't have that, but they used to look in the garbage to see if your name and address, because you didn't have private garbage. And because you were just living there as an artist and you really didn't need something more elaborate. So that's how I got to Woodstock, and I fell in love. And I've been in love with it ever since.
Pass the mic to Jenne. Thank you.
this a good sound for everybody?
So far.
So far, so good? Okay.
Who's speaking?
Jenne Currie.
That's
I
better.
didn't hear that. Okay. Yeah, okay, I'll speak up. Yeah, I was actually born and raised here, so I guess that's all I have to say. No, in retrospect, of course, growing up in this town was an amazing experience. I was coming up in the 1960s, and needless to say, it was a pretty lively place. It was an extremely social environment. All the different, it wasn't just painters and sculptors who socialized, but it was like filmmakers and novelists and the gamut. CBS newscasters, we were all partying together and mixing up our creative ideas, and it was just, and also the kids in that generation and in this town, the adults and the children all hung out together. All the kids would come to the dinner parties and listen to all the crazy conversations and like arguments about Vietnam and about art, and it was just an incredibly stimulating environment for a little kid. And the other thing about being around all those intellectuals and creative people, they all sort of raised each other's children. I mean, I feel like I had a dozen aunts and uncles around here, and when they saw that my first love was color, and then I found out that paints had color, and you could make color with paints, and I was, by age 7, I was off and running and loving to paint, and of course everybody saw that, and, as soon as they saw that, they really nurtured me and encouraged me, and the amazing thing about the general mindset of this community at that time was that people, the adults, not only tolerated crazy creative ideas in their kids, they encouraged it. They said, if you've got a passion and something that you really love deeply doing, you must do it. Go out into the world and do it. And so, of course, I went out down to the city. I went to the Art Students League at age 18, and I spent another 30, almost 35 years in the city doing what I love to do. And I circled back around just about 10 years ago. And here I am. I came back. Woodstock has a way of pulling its children back in for a lot of us. And I'm back living in my family homestead, both my parents being painters. I have this wonderful family home full of art studios that I am loving. Did I say my father is Bruce Currie and my mother's Ethel Magafan? There, I said it at the end. Anyway, I'm back, and that's my story.
Yale.
Okay, so thank you, Nancy, for saving me a lot of trouble in describing how I used to live in New York. So we can go on from there. About the mid-'80s, something started to happen noticeably. It had to do with people. I'm here because of specific people. Around that time, I started to notice that my peers, my artist friends, my teaching colleagues, were all getting places outside of New York. Little places, larger places, all the way from Hoboken to Monhegan to all places in between. One of my dearest friends and colleagues was someone that some people here still remember, Joan Hofstede. Yeah. Anyway, he was a very close friend and persuaded me to come up and visit several times. During one of these visits, I walked into Alice's gallery, Alice in the Freeman Gallery, and it turns out that a friend of hers, I was part of a gallery on West Broadway, and Jane Bound, you might remember her, knew Alice. So already I had those connections, and one thing led to another. You may remember, what's his name, Ben Wigfall in the Cargo something gallery. I visited with him and spoke for hours and had a couple of shows with him. It was just a lot of people started to coagulate around me, and that was telling me something. So my plan was to try to find a place that had a good studio, I was called by a very friendly real estate agent who became our friend, and got a house that didn't have a studio, but we built a studio. The plan was to kind of commute back and forth for maybe 5 years. So as I I hoped I could, come back more full time. So that 5 years didn't happen. 6 months later, 6 months after living here, I just became so spoiled by the environment and everything around that I just gave up teaching and continued to live here. We have, Deborah and I have a great number of friends, and I enjoy just the environment of the new studio, and the place just feels right to spend the rest of my life happily painting here.
Thank you. Portia.
Hello, I'm Portia Munson, and I live here because of the nature. I really, as a young child, I live in the house that my great-grandparents purchased in 1931, and it's, I'm in Catskill, but very close to Palinville, and have been coming up here, was coming up here my whole life, and I can remember as a young child just loving playing in the woods and streams, and it got into my soul then, and I remember thinking as a young child that this is where I was going to eventually live. I had grown up on Long Island, and then about about 30 years ago, I just started to slowly leave New York City and live more and more here. And about 25 years ago, just started being here full time, and I love it, and I still feel really nurtured by the nature and also by the art community, and I feel like the art community is evolving and growing and expanding, and it's part of its vitalness, I think, is because of its proximity to New York City, but it's just always the nature that just really, really holds me here.
So where I'd like to go next in this query is, I have found, so I've been back in Woodstock now for about 11 years, and I found that my productivity boomed. And it wasn't, and so what I'm curious about is whether you feel that you're just as regimented, perhaps even more regimented, in your work style and in your use of time being here than you were in the city. In other words, is it more distracting here, or is it less distracting than it was in Soho or Tribeca or whatever? You don't all have to answer this one, but one or two of you would be nice. Anybody want to try this one?
Well, I just had a thought.
Go ahead.
And looking for parking here. Okay, so because of what's going on out there, and it's increasingly so, I've found the last few years, though my social life on the weekend here may have suffered, I've gained hours and hours and hours more in the studio on the weekends, because I don't come to town from Thursday night to Monday morning. So that's one of the ways this town has affected my artwork.
Anybody else? How would you say your productivity has changed, or is it the same?
I'm a woman, and I'm a wife, and I'm a mother, so I've got to do all kinds of stuff, whether I'm in the city or I'm here. It's not, I'm still struggling with trying to be like, I'm going to the studio from this hour to this hour on these days. It just doesn't happen. What I do as far as time, quality of time, I'd say it's more expansive and it's wider, and it's not in contrast to the city. I'm not thinking about what everybody else is making and what everybody else is doing. I'm not, I'm sorry, but it's very competitive, the art world in the city. in particular. And everywhere you go, you're reminded of that. And like Portia says, nature doesn't do that to you. You know, nature reminds you that you're a very small part of a very large thing, and that helps my work.
Trying to understand the question. Yes, because
Well, the question is compared to the city,
yes,
are you
and
more productive
right.
or less
And
productive?
not only compared with the city, also compared with China.
Right.
Yeah. Here is a really peaceful place. Our place, you've been there. Almost like we have the studio the pre-owner already built. Very good space. Also, we're surrounded by the woods. We don't own the woods, but the beauty, the space gives to us a lot peaceful time. And so sometimes even I go back to China. China is famous for crowded people, very crowded, and not only that, crowded mind. People now thinking how to make money, how to getting rich, and even how house prices, everything. And I only see trees. There's no price. It's priceless. You know, I just feel everything is pure in art.
Let's move on. You know, the other thing that I was thinking about is whether or not we're really isolated from the art world by being in Woodstock or being in the country, or whether in fact we're just as in touch with it. And it seems to me that in particularly the last decade, but even it's been developing for several decades, we're in the digital age where staying in touch, and this was borne out tremendously in the pandemic, it's possible to be isolated, supposedly isolated, and yet to be just as in touch, just as connected, just as able to communicate to galleries, collectors, fellow artists, etc., being here. So what has been a few of you at least, what has been your experience of that? Being an artist in the digital age while living in a place like Woodstock.
I was actually going to tie in two questions. The first question that you were asking, which I didn't answer, because I was trying to figure it out, it kind of links in with the second one. When I lived in the city, I lived in a great little studio, but it was a rental, and I had a much simpler lifestyle in the big crazy, I was living in the middle of Manhattan, but I had more time to work because I wasn't managing a house and a property. So on that hand, it was more bizarre, it was more simple in the city, which sounds odd, but it was true for me. Up here, I have a much more complicated life, a big piece of property and a lovely, wonderful, huge house. So that's more complicated and distracting, but I feel like the community is very supportive, especially I do teach at the Woodstock School of Art and have been for the last 10 years, and that's a very supportive community. And so I find the trade-off between having a big crazy house to manage, but also having a really lovely environment that I'm living and working in is, so there are pros and cons of both the city and country living for me. And the digital world, I'm working on it. That's my next challenge, is tackling the digital world and getting out there. So that's a work in progress for sure.
I have an enigma that maybe you can help me figure out. When I was in the city, I was painting landscapes.
A little bit louder.
When I was in the city, I was painting abstract landscapes. There were horizontals and suggestions of perhaps mountain ranges and sunsets, but they're abstract. Very soon after I came here, I stopped with the landscapes. I started painting ideas. You know, one idea getting to another, struggling through it, as we all know, you know, how that works on canvas. That's strange, isn't it? Any psychologists in
You're actually touching
the audience? Why does that happen?
Yeah, you're actually touching on my next question to all of you. Yeah, which is, here we are surrounded by nature. Many of the artists in this show, in this exhibition, are not focused on nature. At least I think are not focused on nature, at least not representationally. So to what degree would you say, and anybody can answer this, to what degree would you say that being immersed in the natural surroundings in a place like Woodstock and surrounding really puts you much more in touch with nature? Is that informing your work any more than it was when you were in the city? You just answered it for you. Or do you just feel comfortable going on doing abstract work? I mean, I'm an abstract artist, so I could be surrounded by unlimited nature and it would not be a distraction. I mean, it would not be directly impacting my work, indirectly perhaps. So who would speak to that question that Yale just touched upon? Portia?
Well, I could say something. Okay. Sure. I work in a wide range of ways. Some of my work is very nature-based, where I'm gathering and scanning flowers and dead birds and creatures. And then some of my work is filled with plastic and or still life paintings. But I feel like it all comes out of this place. Like, even though I'm surrounded by nature, I'm also, unless you're in the middle of Canada or Alaska or something, you're surrounded also by people. And I get a lot of inspiration from looking at the cast-offs of the culture. So for me, going to yard sales or free piles or thrift stores or walking in the woods along a stream and seeing what kinds of trash is being washed down or left behind, like all of those things also figure into my work. So I feel like being in nature, living in this area, has just kind of expanded my my work and my mindset. Probably was also expanded by having children. I would say that added an awful lot to my work as well.
Anyone else on that subject?
You can see my work. I'm a figurative painting. A lot of people's life in my painting, but I still need to be very quiet to paint them. Yeah, I travel a lot to China and Tibetan and also New York and even sometimes Woodstock subject in my painting. But when I paint it, I need a little bit distance from them because when I involved with them, I can love them, enjoy them, but when I paint, I want to be alone. And I think that the surrounding, the natural, like classical music, when I paint, I always...
So here we are, knee deep in the country, and in the greater art world, there have really been multiple revolutions going on. One is, of course, the digital revolution. We're all affected by it one way or the other. But in addition to that, it's my observation that movements have all but vanished. And what we live in the greater art world is the embracing of all movements that ever existed, and even things that seem to come along are part of a tremendous, a plethora of simultaneous movements, so that it becomes possible to have a career, to have your own practice, be whatever you want it to be. How has that change affected you? Seemingly in something of an isolation, being in the country, and yet wherever you go, whether it's online or art fair or city visits, etc., you really are exposed to this, I would say, broad acceptance of everything that ever existed and everything else that comes along with seemingly equal weight. What's your impression of that? You don't have to agree with that.
I was just thinking, when you mentioned, you used the phrase of being isolated in the country. I think one of the amazing things about Woodstock is that it is so close, of course, that's why people have settled up here or use it as a part-time home. It is so close to New York City, and that's one of the beauties. We're in this beautiful, rural, natural area, and yet we can pop down to the city in no time and not feel isolated, right? We can have, as people always said to me, oh, you've got the best of both worlds, when I had both my city and country place. And yeah, so we can have isolation, peace and quiet, and yet we're very much connected with the New York City art world. That's why my parents actually settled here in the 1940s as artists, and all of their peers, right after the Second World War, that this was a big draw when, in the days when New York City was the only art scene in the entire United States. Right after the Second World War, that was it. And so all the older artists were saying, if you want to live in the country, you can't stand the idea of living in New York City, but if you're a serious artist, you got to be near New York. This was the place to come. It was already an artist colony, and back in those days, it wasn't any 2 hours to get to the city, but it was doable. And that was an enormous draw. So artists could stay engaged in the art world and yet have a tranquil lifestyle. So.
Okay, so you're talking about movements no longer existing,
No.
or not being important.
What I'm saying is,
Or having weight.
we seem to have reached a place where they're all coexisting, and unlike in unlike, let's say, in the 70s, 80s, or 90s, where you had specific, very dominant art movements, and you either had to adhere to one of those movements to survive, or you were sort of lost in the shuffle. And today, it seems that you can be doing virtually any kind of art. There are people in this exhibit, artists in this exhibit, that are doing minimalist art, artists that are doing what I would call neo-cubist art, conceptual, you know. Okay.
Well, those are choices you guys made for this show. I think that the reason that that's going on right now is we're in the midst of reassessing the canon, and we're in the midst of including artists of color, women artists. We're in the midst of hallelujah, re-looking at why art is created, who creates art. We're even looking at anonymous and traditional work differently. We're even starting to realize that those things were stolen and smuggled. And I mean, I just think it's a moment of reorganization. And there are movements, and people are still adhering to movements and still listening to each other. And what the internet has done, the internet has broadened that. Internet, social media, same thing, has broadened that to where it doesn't take, you don't have to go to Yale, and you don't have to go through gatekeepers in order for your work to be seen. And so somebody can be creating at their kitchen table, and we don't have to wait till they're dead and somebody digs it out of the garbage. I mean, it's kind of amazing, and it's like as if all the balls have right now been thrown in the air, and we're going to wait and see where they. I was just doing a written interview, and I was asked, what works do you go look at regularly and look? And I realized that the museums I go to regularly have all been reshuffled to show, like you go to MoMA now and you see everything that was happening at the time of Hongnian in all these different countries, and you see this zeitgeist. And I started going to art fairs I didn't get to New York until the mid-'80s, but so I started going to art fairs soon off, and when I would travel to Europe and go to art fairs, or some of this, I would go to art fairs just so I could recognize the zeitgeist, because it was amazing to me at that point. The only communication amongst the art world were art magazines, and they wouldn't come out until after the shows were down. So how did they know? But it was really incredible to me that there were these things, these ideas circulating simultaneously, without, it's without real communication in that way. So anyway.
Well, that's my thesis in a nutshell. What I think would be nice, because we're going to try to keep this to about an hour, is to allow people in the audience to ask questions, either of the whole panel or to any specific artist, or make comments. If you think your voice will boom, say it from where you are. If you don't think so, come up and speak into a mic. Don't everybody?
Hi, my name's Jenne Dominique. I'm a
Maybe come speak into this mic.
Okay. I just wanted to make a comment. Nice to meet all of you. I've known some of your work for just decades. So really good to see you in person.
Just because you have a mic,
Right.
you don't have to project.
Okay, sorry. My name is Jenne Dominique, and I am a New York City and upstate artist combined. Mostly I paint, I do installation work. And I, in your last question, was just wondering if you know of Terry Smith's writing. He's a contemporary art historian and critic. And he writes about globalism as a kind of movement and talks about contemporaneity as, again, a kind of ism or movement that is all-inclusive, of all people's arts everywhere at the same time. That's all I want to say.
I don't know him, but it's probably not his fault. Anybody else? Sylvia.
Hi, I'm Sylvia Leonard Wolf, and I'm thrilled that this is happening here. Doug had run a program, something like this, for 40-something years called Artists Talk on Art, and during our long walks weekly through the Como, and he would tell me about that light bulb, like, wait a minute, this town is, you can't walk 2 feet and not fall over an artist. And the thing is, a lot of them are really, really good. So what about starting a forum for the Woodstock Byrdcliffe Guild? I chaired, thank you to Nancy Azara, who chaired the exhibition committee of the Woodstock Byrdcliffe Guild for many years, and then asked me to carry on. And on that committee was Heather and Portia, and these are all friends. What's extraordinary to me is that, yes, there are towns that are known to be or have had art communities. Old Lyme, Connecticut, Provincetown, San Francisco, et cetera, et cetera. What's really incredibly special about Woodstock is it has been happening here since 1902, and it's still going strong. So I'm just thrilled that you are interested and the artists are here, and I'm wondering whether it's not that the history and the energy of all the artists who have been here for so many years has not also made these artists want to be here and continue to produce. So that's really a question for all of you.
Well, I think the answer is somewhat obvious, right? It's, when I was looking up, past names recently, trying to think of, well, who would this generation, well, it's not going to be more than one generation, this grouping, this people that are in, the artists that are in this show, who do they look back to? Where are the connections? And some of them are parental or grandparental, but it's still very much alive in the sense that any reading of Woodstock history reveals hundreds and hundreds of artists, many of whom I would recognize and people in this audience would recognize. And so that's a legacy that we can all tap, it's available to us to all tap into. And it's part of what makes it so fascinating to be here. I'd like to thank a few people before I forget to do that, before we all start enjoying more of the show. Of course, Ursula Morgan, who's our exhibition director, and has been extremely helpful. And Abby, would you stand up? This is Abby Herman, who is my assistant for the entire project of pulling together the exhibition and the catalog. And also Jen Dragon, who helped out with the virtual catalog and the issue.com platform, and all the forum committee members, which include Sylvia Leonard Wolf, Rachel Jackson, Maggie Grieve, Holly George Warren, and Ken Wendell, as well as our graphics designer, Susanna Ronner, Judy Turman, who did the majority of the Zoom, whatever you want to call it, management, control, recording. Thank you, Judy. And everybody else, you'll have to go to the catalog. There are other people that I'm thanking in the catalog. And now, please join us, all the artists, meet the artists, enjoy the rest of the show, have some refreshments, and while you're doing that, we're going to be clearing the chairs away. Thank you for coming.
For envisioning our virtual program coming to the gallery. So thank you all for joining us. We're going to, as he said, break down chairs, open up wine, seltzer, and enjoy looking at the artwork. Thank you so much.